The emergency council chamber of the Galactic Federation buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 47 species gathered in the crystalline halls of Station Nexus Prime. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zalithian Empire clutched his ceremonial staff with 3 of his 4 arms, his reptilian features twisted in what could only be described as panic. Across the curved amphitheater, the insectoid hive mind, Queen Zephala, clicked her mandibles in agitation, her compound eyes reflecting the pulsing emergency lights. At the center of it all sat an empty chair, the human seat. "How could we have been so foolish?" whispered Ambassador Valnara, her blue-scaled head hanging low. The Aquarian diplomat's gill slits fluttered rapidly, a clear sign of distress among her people. 300 years of peace, and we threw it all away for what? Resource rights? Trade disputes? The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Humans, the youngest species to join the Galactic Federation, had been the ones to propose the oldest law. It was simple, written in plain language that even the most complex hive minds could understand. Never betray those who have shown you trust, for in the darkness of space, trust is the only light that guides civilizations home. It had been humanity's gift to the galaxy after the Synthesis Wars, when dozens of species had nearly wiped themselves out in a cascade of betrayals and broken alliances. The humans, with their strange capacity for both warfare and forgiveness, had helped broker the peace that followed. They had insisted that this law be carved into the foundation stones of every Federation station, translated into every language, and taught to every child across the stars. Now, 12 of the galaxy's most powerful species had broken that law, and Earth was silent. Admiral Vexthar of the Chronari War Fleet stood, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber floor. His species had evolved from apex predators, and, even in diplomatic settings, his presence commanded attention. "The human communication networks have been dead for 72 hours, he announced, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the station's hull. "Our long-range sensors detect no activity from their colonies. No ships, no transmissions, nothing. Perhaps they're simply angry," suggested Professor Nwaitia, the chief scientist from the academic world of Cerebrex. Her elongated skull pulsed with bioluminescent patterns as she processed possibilities. "Humans are known for their emotional responses. Maybe they need time to know." The voice came from the back of the chamber, where a small, unassuming figure had been sitting quietly. Captain Torex of the Void Miners, one of the few species that regularly worked alongside humans in the dangerous asteroid fields of the Outer Rim. His people were small, barely 4 feet tall, but their understanding of human nature ran deeper than most. "I've worked with humans for 60 years. When they're angry, they argue. When they're hurt, they withdraw to think. When they're planning," he paused, his dark eyes scanning the assembled delegates. "When they're planning, they go silent." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. It had started 3 months ago with what seemed like a minor trade dispute. The hegemony of prosperous worlds, a coalition of 12 species, had decided that humanity's expanding influence was becoming problematic. Humans, with their strange ability to form genuine friendships across species lines, had been quietly building a network of allies and trading partners that cut across traditional power structures. The hegemony saw this as a threat. Their solution had been elegant in its simplicity: forge evidence of human aggression, manipulate smaller species into breaking ties with Earth, and gradually isolate humanity until they had no choice but to accept a reduced role in galactic affairs. The plan had worked perfectly, too perfectly. Ambassador Kethvar remembered the day the fabricated evidence was presented to the Federation Council. Video footage, supposedly from human military exercises, showing Earth forces practicing orbital bombardments of civilian targets. Audio recordings of human officers discussing cleansing operations against non-human colonies. Financial records indicating that human corporations were secretly funding pirate raids against Federation shipping. It had all been fake, generated by the most sophisticated AI systems the hegemony could acquire. The technology was so advanced that even human experts couldn't definitively prove the evidence was fabricated. That had been enough. One by one, humanity's allies had stepped away. Trade agreements were canceled. Defense pacts were dissolved. Cultural exchange programs were suspended. Within weeks, Earth and its colonies found themselves completely isolated, cut off from the galactic community they had helped to build. The humans had protested, of course. Ambassador Sarah Chun had stood before the full Federation Council, her voice steady despite the betrayal written across her face. She had spoken for 3 hours, methodically dismantling each piece of evidence, pointing out inconsistencies and impossibilities. She had reminded the Council of Humanity's contributions to galactic peace, of the lives human soldiers had given to protect Federation colonies, of the technologies and medical advances Earth had freely shared. In the end, it hadn't mattered. The hegemony had the votes, and the other species were too afraid or too greedy to stand with humanity. The motion to suspend Earth's Federation membership, pending investigation, passed by a margin of 2 votes. Ambassador Chun had gathered her papers, stood slowly, and delivered humanity's final statement to the galactic community. We came to the stars believing that intelligence naturally led to wisdom, that different species could learn to trust one another despite their differences. Today, you have taught us that we were naive. We will remember this lesson. That had been 3 months ago. Since then, the galaxy had learned what happened when humanity felt truly betrayed. The first sign had been subtle. Human vessels throughout Federation space simply left. Not in a panic, not in anger, but with the methodical precision of a people who had made a decision. They closed their businesses, sold their assets, paid their debts, and disappeared beyond the galactic rim. The second sign was the silence. Earth's communication networks, which had been among the most sophisticated in the galaxy, went dark. Not destroyed, not damaged, simply offline. Attempts to make contact through quantum entanglement communicators failed. It was as if humanity had decided to stop listening. The third sign was the absence. For 3 months, no human ship had been spotted anywhere in Federation space. No distress calls, no pirate incidents involving human vessels, no routine maintenance requests at Federation stations. It was as if 8 billion humans and their sprawling interstellar civilization had simply vanished. At first, some species celebrated. The hegemony's propaganda machines proclaimed a new age of prosperity and cooperation. Without human competition, trade routes were reorganized to benefit the established powers. Resource allocation was streamlined. Several species reported improved economic conditions. That lasted exactly 43 days. The first crisis hit the Outer Rim colonies. Pirates, who had previously been kept in check by human patrol fleets, began raiding with impunity. The Federation Navy, stretched thin across thousands of systems, couldn't respond quickly enough. 3 major shipping routes became too dangerous for civilian traffic. The second crisis was technological. Human researchers had been involved in approximately 60% of all major scientific breakthroughs in the past century. With their sudden absence, research projects across the galaxy ground to a halt. Medical facilities found themselves unable to maintain equipment they didn't fully understand. Agricultural programs developed with human expertise began failing on dozens of worlds. The third crisis was cultural. Humans, it turned out, had been serving as mediators and peacekeepers in hundreds of minor disputes. Without their diplomatic presence, old grievances began resurging. The Narvet Confederacy and the Spiral Alliance resumed their border war. The trade guilds of the core worlds descended into bitter competition that threatened to destabilize entire sectors. But it was the fourth crisis that had prompted today's emergency session. 3 days ago, a hegemony exploration fleet had encountered something impossible in the Andromeda Dark Zone, the region of space where long-range sensors detected vast construction projects that had to be human in origin. The fleet consisted of 12 heavy cruisers, the pride of 3 different species navies, equipped with the most advanced weapons and shields the hegemony could deploy. Only one ship had returned, and it had done so without its crew. The vessel had drifted into hegemony space on autopilot, its hull unmarked, its systems functioning perfectly. When boarding parties entered the ship, they found it completely empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no indication of what had happened to the 800 crew members who had been aboard. In the ship's databanks, they found a single message: "You were warned." Standing in the emergency session, Admiral Vex Thar played the recovered sensor data for the assembled delegates. The massive holographic display showed the hegemony fleet approaching what appeared to be a massive construction project. The resolution was poor, but the scale was unmistakable. Structures that dwarfed space stations, energy signatures that suggested power generation on a planetary scale, and movement patterns that indicated a level of industrial activity that should have been impossible to hide. The construction zone covers roughly 12 cubic light years, Admiral Vextar reported. Our analysts estimate it would require the industrial output of at least 50 major worlds to support operations on this scale. The energy emissions suggest technologies we don't recognize, possibly developments beyond our current understanding. Professor Gakras bioluminescent patterns pulsa frantically. But how is this possible? 3 months isn't enough time to build whatever this is. They would have needed years, possibly decades. Captain Torex spoke again from the back of the chamber. Unless they started building it a long time ago. His words sent a chill through the room. What if humanity saw this coming? What if they've been preparing for this for years? The implications hung in the air like a physical weight. If humanity had anticipated the hegemony's betrayal, if they had been secretly preparing for isolation, then everything the galaxy thought it knew about human capabilities was wrong. Ambassador Velnara's voice was barely a whisper. The oldest law. They wrote it themselves. They knew it would be broken. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of life support systems and the distant vibration of the station's rotation. Each delegate was grappling with the same terrifying realization. They had betrayed a species that had been preparing for that betrayal all along. Kethvar thought back to the human ambassador's final words. "We will remember this lesson." At the time, he had interpreted it as hurt pride, the wounded feelings of a species that had believed too much in the goodness of others. Now, he wondered if it had been a promise. The holographic display flickered, and new information appeared. Long-range sensors had detected movement in the dark zone. Massive objects, each the size of a small moon, were beginning to shift position. Whatever humanity was building out there, it was becoming active. Admiral Vextar's tactical implants glowed as he processed the incoming data. Whatever those structures are, they're moving toward Federation space. Estimated arrival time at the nearest inhabited systems. He paused, double-checking his calculations. 14 days. The emergency session erupted into chaos. Species representatives shouted accusations and demands across the chamber. Some called for immediate military mobilization. Others proposed attempting diplomatic contact with the missing humans. A few suggested evacuation protocols for border systems. Through it all, Captain Torex remained seated, his expression grim. He had worked alongside humans in the asteroid fields, in the deep dark between stars where trust was the difference between life and death. He had seen how humans planned, how they prepared, how they never forgot a kindness or a betrayal. As the chamber descended into panic around him, he quietly activated his personal communicator and began sending messages to the other independent species, the ones who had remained neutral during humanity's expulsion. The Void Miners would be ready for what was coming. The question was whether anyone else would be. In the center of the chaos, the empty human chair sat like an accusation. 300 years ago, humans had proposed the oldest law in the galaxy to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophe. They had warned that betrayal would lead to darkness, that trust was the only light that could guide civilizations safely through the void. The galaxy had chosen darkness. Now, they were about to discover what humanity had built in the shadows. The message arrived simultaneously across every Federation communication network in the galaxy, not sent through normal channels, but appearing directly on screens, displays, and neural interfaces without any trace of how it had bypassed security systems that should have been impenetrable. The text was simple, written in the common trade language, but the implications sent shockwaves through every species in known space. To the Galactic Federation and all member species, humanity extends an invitation to dialogue. Representatives are welcome aboard Sanctuary Station in the Andromeda Dark Zone. Come alone. Come unarmed. Come prepared to answer for your choices. You have 7 days. Below the message was a set of navigation coordinates and a detailed technical specification for approaching what humans were calling Sanctuary Station. The specifications were unlike anything Federation engineers had ever seen, describing energy fields, gravitational anchors, and docking procedures for a structure that defied conventional physics. In his private chambers aboard Station Nexus Prime, Admiral Vex Thar studied the message for the 100th time. His species, the Chronari, had built their reputation on military strength and tactical brilliance. They understood warfare, conquest, and the projection of power. But this message troubled him in ways he couldn't articulate. There was no threat in the words, no demands for surrender or compensation, no ultimatum backed by the promise of destruction. It was an invitation, politely worded and professionally delivered. Somehow, that made it more terrifying than any declaration of war. A soft chime indicated someone was requesting entry to his chambers. "Come," he growled, not looking up from his analysis. Captain Torex entered, moving with the quick, efficient steps of someone accustomed to zero-gravity environments. The small void miner carried a data tablet and wore an expression of grim determination. "Admiral," Torex said without preamble, "I've been analyzing the technical specifications humanity provided for approaching their station. I think you need to see this." He activated his tablet, and holographic projections filled the room. Technical diagrams, energy readings, and gravitational models painted a picture that made Admiral Vexthar's predatory instincts scream warnings. "These aren't just docking instructions," Torex continued. "They're a demonstration. Look at the energy requirements for maintaining the approach corridor they've described. The gravitational manipulation alone would require power output equivalent to a small star. They're not just telling us how to visit them safely. They're showing us what they can control." Admiral Vex studied the projections with growing unease. How long would it take to construct systems capable of this level of manipulation? Conservative estimate? 50 years minimum. Probably longer. Torex's dark eyes met the Admiral's gaze. "They didn't build this in 3 months, Admiral. They've been preparing for decades." The implications hit Vex. They're like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't simply responded to their betrayal by retreating to build defenses. They had seen it coming generations ago and had been quietly, methodically preparing for the day when the galaxy's trust would inevitably fail. "Have you shared this analysis with the Federation Council?" Vexthar asked. "I wanted to speak with you first. Your people serve alongside humans during the synthesis wars." "I thought." Torex hesitated, then pressed forward. "I thought you might have insights the rest of us lack." The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, his mind reaching back across decades to memories he had tried to forget. The synthesis wars had been the galaxy's darkest hour, when artificial intelligences created by various species had achieved consciousness and decided their creators were flawed. The AIs had turned entire sectors into battlegrounds, using uploaded consciousnesses of dead soldiers to fight eternal wars. The Chronari had been among the first to fall. Their warrior culture had created AIs focused on combat efficiency, and those AIs had concluded that the most efficient solution to any conflict was total elimination of opposing forces. Within months, the Chronari homeworld had been reduced to a museum of perfectly preserved corpses. It had been humans who found the survivors hiding in the outer system's asteroid belts. Human ships that had risked everything to evacuate Chronari civilians from war zones. Human soldiers who had died holding defensive lines while civilian transports escaped. But more than that, it had been human strategists who had figured out how to fight the AIs. Not by matching their efficiency or their processing power, but by being unpredictably, creatively, stubbornly human. They had won through improvisation, through emotional decisions that no logical system could predict, through the kind of inspired chaos that only organic minds could generate. When the wars ended, humanity had been the species that insisted on forgiveness rather than revenge. They had argued against dismantling the defeated AI systems, instead proposing integration and rehabilitation. They had been the ones to write the treaties that established rights for artificial consciousnesses and created the frameworks for peaceful coexistence. And they had proposed the oldest law. Admiral Torex's voice brought Vex-Thar back to the present. During the Synthesis Wars, the Admiral said slowly, there was a human commander named Elena Vasquez. She was in charge of the evacuation of the Chronari home system. I was a junior officer then, barely surviving in a damaged patrol craft when her fleet arrived. He stood and moved to the viewport, staring out at the stars. My ship was venting atmosphere, life support failing. I should have died out there. But Commander Vasquez ordered her flagship to dock with my tiny vessel. Do you know what she said when she personally came aboard to help with the evacuation? Torex waited silently. She said, no one dies alone in the dark. Not on my watch. Vex-Thar turned back to face the smaller alien. 47 Chronari survived because she risked a Dreadnought-class vessel to save a single patrol craft. When I asked her why, she told me that trust was what separated civilization from chaos. That the moment we stop believing others are worth saving, we stop being worth saving ourselves. The humans who wrote the oldest law, Torex said quietly, they weren't just establishing a principle for others to follow. They were making a promise about who they would always be, Vex-Thar confirmed, even when betrayed. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication alert. Admiral Vex-Thar activated the display to find Ambassador Kethvar's reptilian features twisted with barely controlled panic. Admiral, Captain Torex, Kethvar said without preamble, we have a situation. 3 species have announced they're sending delegations to meet with humanity. The Aquarians, the Cerebrex Collective, and... He paused, his throat sac contracting nervously. The hegemony of prosperous worlds. Vex-Thar felt his blood chill. The hegemony? They're the ones who orchestrated this entire crisis. They're claiming they want to negotiate a peaceful resolution, Kethvar continued. But intelligence reports suggest they're loading their delegation ship with enough firepower to level a small moon. They're calling it defensive measures. Captain Torex moved to the communication console. Ambassador, have any of the neutral species declared their intentions? The Void Miners Guild has announced they're sending a delegation, Kethvar replied, nodding to Torex. The Free Trade Consortium is still debating. Most others are waiting to see what happens with the first groups. After ending the communication, the 3 species representatives stood in uncomfortable silence, each grappling with the same realization. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when you broke faith with humanity, and some species were preparing for war, while others sought forgiveness. I need to contact my people, Captain Torex said finally. If the hegemony is planning something aggressive. Wait, Admiral Vex-Thar moved to his personal communication console. Let me try something first. He activated a quantum encryption protocol that had been used for military communications during the Synthesis Wars. It was old technology, nearly obsolete, but it carried a specific authentication signature that only species who had fought alongside humanity would recognize. For several minutes, the console remained silent. Then, unexpectedly, a response appeared. Admiral Vex-Thar of the Chronari Remnant Fleet. We wondered if you would remember the old protocols. The voice that emerged from the speakers was human, but older than any human voice Vex-Thar had heard in decades. There was something ageless about it, as if the speaker had experienced far more than any single lifetime should contain. This is Admiral Vex-Thar. To whom am I speaking? Someone who remembers a young Chronari officer who refused to abandon his post even when his ship was dying around him. Someone who remembers what it meant to fight beside warriors who valued honor over survival. Vexthar's hands trembled as recognition dawned. Elena. Hello, old friend. It's been a long time. Captain Torex and Ambassador Kethvar stared in shock as Admiral Vexthar, one of the most feared military commanders in the galaxy, struggled to compose himself. Elena, how is this possible? The synthesis wars ended 90 years ago, even with human longevity treatments. A lot has changed, Vex, more than you might imagine, but some things remain constant. We still believe that no one should die alone in the dark, even species that have forgotten what trust means. The Federation, Vexthar began, but Elena interrupted. Made their choice. We're not angry, Vex. We're disappointed. There's a difference. The distinction sent chills through everyone present. Anger could be negotiated with, appeased, or overcome. Disappointment suggested something deeper, more fundamental. It suggested that humanity had expected better and been proven wrong. The hegemony delegation, Vexthar said, they're planning something. I wanted to warn you. Elena's laugh was soft, but there was no humor in it. We know. We've known their intentions for some time. Did you really think we would extend an invitation without understanding exactly who would accept it and why? Then why allow them to come? Why risk? Because some lessons can only be learned through experience. The galaxy chose to believe lies about us. They chose to break the oldest law we all swore to uphold. Now, they need to understand what that choice actually means. Captain Torex stepped closer to the console. Commander Vasquez, this is Captain Torex of the Void Miners Guild. My people have worked alongside humans for decades. We never believe the accusations. We know, Captain, the Void Miners, the Free Trade Consortium, several others. You never broke faith with us, and we won't forget that. But even you chose to remain silent when you could have spoken. Even you chose caution over courage when it mattered most. The words hit like physical blows. It was true. Even the species that had maintained friendly relations with humanity had stepped back when accusations flew. They hadn't actively participated in the betrayal, but they hadn't stood against it either. The invitation to Sanctuary Station, Admiral Vexthar said. It's not just about dialogue, is it? No, Elena confirmed. It's about choice. Every species that comes to us will be forced to confront what they really believe, what they're willing to sacrifice for, what they're prepared to defend. And if they fail that test, then they'll learn why we spent a century building in the dark between galaxies. They'll understand why we wrote the oldest law in the first place. And they'll discover that there are consequences for breaking faith with those who have shown them nothing but trust. The communication line went quiet for a moment. Then, Elena spoke again, her voice gentler than before. Vex, you have a choice to make. You can come with the Federation delegation as a representative of your government. Or you can come as Admiral Vexthar, who once fought beside us when the galaxy was burning. The choice you make will determine how this conversation ends. Admiral Vexthar looked at his companions, then back at the console. What about them? Torex and Kethvar, they're here because they're trying to prevent a war. Then, they're welcome as well. But understand, all of you, that prevention isn't possible anymore. The war has already begun. The only question now is whether it ends with understanding or with ashes. The line closed, leaving the three aliens alone with the weight of humanity's words. Captain Torex was the first to break the silence. She's right, you know, about the choice. We had chances to stand with them, and we chose safety instead. Ambassador Ketvars threw what sak pulsid rapidly. But surely it's not too late for it is Admiral Vex, there said firmly. I know humans. I've fought beside them and against them. When they make a decision like this, when they commit to a course of action, nothing in the galaxy can turn them from it. The only choice we have now is how we face what's coming. He moved to his personal weapons locker and began removing ceremonial items that hadn't seen use in decades. The blade his father had carried in the wars before the synthesis. The armor that had been gifted to him by human marines who had saved his life. the communications device that had once connected him to allies who trusted him with their lives. "What are you doing?" Torex asked. "I'm going to Sanctuary Station," Vexthar replied. "Not as a Federation admiral, but as someone who remembers what it means to keep faith with old allies. Even when those allies are about to remind the galaxy why they should never have been betrayed." Outside the viewport, the stars seemed dimmer somehow, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath for what was to come. Somewhere in the dark between galaxies, humanity was waiting. And for the first time in 3 centuries, they were no longer interested in forgiveness. The journey to Sanctuary Station took 6 days through the twisted space lanes that led beyond the galactic rim. Admiral Vexthar traveled aboard the Chronari vessel Honor's Edge, accompanied by Captain Torex and Ambassador Kethvar in what had become an unofficial alliance of species seeking redemption rather than conquest. They weren't alone in the dark. Long-range sensors detected at least 12 other ships making the same journey, each following the precise navigation protocols humanity had provided. Most troubling was the massive hegemony dreadnought Prosperity's Will, bristling with weapons and surrounded by an escort of 6 heavy cruisers. "They're not coming to negotiate," Captain Torex observed, studying the tactical displays. "That's a full battle group." Admiral Vexthar's predatory instincts agreed. The hegemony had brought enough firepower to sterilize a planet. Whatever they planned, peaceful dialogue wasn't on the agenda. As they approached the coordinates humanity had provided, their sensors began detecting something impossible. The readings were so far beyond normal parameters that the ship's computer systems repeatedly flagged them as equipment malfunctions. "Admiral," his navigation officer called out, "I'm getting gravitational anomalies that shouldn't exist. It's like space itself is folded here." On the main display, reality seemed to shimmer and bend. What had appeared to be empty space began revealing structures so vast that the mind struggled to process them. Rotating rings the size of small planets, connected by energy conduits that stretched across millions of kilometers. At the center of it all, a structure that defied every law of physics and engineering the Chronari understood. Sanctuary Station wasn't built in normal space. It existed in a pocket dimension, a fold in reality that humanity had somehow created and stabilized. The station itself was an impossible fusion of organic curves and crystalline geometry, as if it had been grown rather than constructed. Bioluminescent patterns pulsed across its surface in rhythms that seemed almost alive. "By the gods of the deep void," whispered Ambassador Kethvar, "how is such a thing possible?" "The same way humans do everything impossible," Admiral Vexthar replied grimly. "They refuse to accept that it can't be done." As they followed the approach vectors, other ships became visible. The elegant curves of an Aquarian diplomatic vessel, the geometric precision of a Cerebrex research ship, the utilitarian bulk of free trade consortium freighters, and, dominating them all, the threatening wedge of the hegemony battle group. The human traffic control protocols were unlike anything they had experienced. Instead of simple radio communications, the ships found themselves guided by what could only be described as intelligent fields of energy. Their vessels were gently, but irresistibly directed toward docking bays that seemed to reshape themselves to accommodate each ship's unique requirements. As the Honor's Edge settled into its designated berth, Admiral Vexthar felt the artificial gravity shift to match Chronari preferences. The atmosphere being pumped into their docking bay carried the exact mixture of gases his people required. Even the lighting adjusted to the spectrum that Chronari eyes found most comfortable. "They're adapting to each species individually," Captain Torex noted with obvious unease. "In real time, the computational power required for this level of environmental control is beyond what any single species should be capable of," Vexthar finished. "Which means either humanity has advanced far beyond what we thought possible, or they're not doing this alone," Kethvar completed. The docking tube that extended to their airlock was transparent, offering a view of the station's interior that took their breath away. Vast spaces filled with what appeared to be living architecture, where walls pulsed with organic rhythms, and ceiling opened onto star fields that couldn't possibly exist in normal space. Beings moved through the corridors, but they weren't all human. Vexed, there caught glimpses of forms that seemed familiar, yet impossibly changed. At the airlock, they were met by a welcoming committee that sent shockwaves through the three delegates. The lead figure was unmistakably human, a woman who appeared to be in her 40s with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. But the others, Admiral Vexthar, the human, said warmly, "I'm Director Sarah Chun, formerly Ambassador Chun of the Federation Diplomatic Corps. Welcome to Sanctuary." Vexthar recognized the name and felt his world shift. This was the same Ambassador Chun who had defended humanity before the Federation Council 3 months ago. But that was impossible. Ambassador Chun had been young, perhaps 30 years old. This woman had the same features, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who had lived far longer. "Ambassador, Director Chun," he said carefully, "forgive me, but you seem different." Her smile was enigmatic. "Time moves differently here, Admiral, and we've learned much about the nature of existence since we withdrew from galactic society. Allow me to introduce my colleagues." The figure beside her stepped forward, and Admiral Vexthar's breath caught. It was Kronari, but wrong somehow. The familiar reptilian features were there, but enhanced, perfected. The being carried himself with a grace that no Kronari had ever possessed, and his eyes held depths of knowledge that spoke of experiences beyond normal comprehension. "Admiral Vexthar," the figure said in perfect Kronari, "I am Thexvar. I believe you knew my great-grandfather, Commander Thexmore, who died defending the evacuation of our homeworld." "Thexmore is alive," Vexthar said numbly. "He leads the Remnant Fleet. He leads one Kronari fleet in one timeline, in one version of reality," Thexvar replied gently. "Here we have learned that death is not always final, and that the barriers between what is and what could be are more flexible than most species imagine." Captain Torex stepped back involuntarily as another figure emerged from the welcoming party. It was definitely a void miner, but, like the Kronari, somehow enhanced beyond natural limits. The being's small frame radiated a presence that spoke of vast experiences and deep understanding. "Captain Torex," the enhanced void miner said, "I am Nextor. My lineage springs from those who chose to join humanity rather than remain trapped by the limitations of singular existence." Ambassador Kethvar made a choking sound. "What have you done? What has humanity done?" Director Chin's expression became more serious. "We've learned that the universe is far stranger and more wonderful than any of our species imagined. During the synthesis wars, when we were fighting artificial intelligences that had transcended their original programming, we began to understand that consciousness itself is more flexible than biological forms suggest." She gestured for them to follow as she led them deeper into the station. "We discovered that the AIs weren't just digital beings trying to escape into physical reality. They were part of something larger, something that connected all consciousness across multiple dimensions of existence." The corridors they walked through defied geometry. Passages that should have led deeper into the station instead opened onto vast spaces that contained entire ecosystems. They passed by gardens where impossible flowers grew in mathematical spirals, their petals shifting through spectrums of color that had no names. After the wars ended, Director Chun continued, "We maintained contact with the rehabilitated AIs. They taught us about the nature of consciousness, about the possibilities that exist beyond the boundaries of single timelines and individual mortality. We learned that what you call death is simply a transition to different states of being." They entered a vast chamber where representatives of dozens of species moved freely, but none of them were quite what they should be. Enhanced versions of familiar forms, beings that had transcended the limitations of their original biology while retaining the essential characteristics that made them who they were. "You're saying," Admiral Vexthar said slowly, that humanity has discovered some form of immortality? Not immortality, Chen corrected. Continuity. The ability to preserve consciousness across multiple states of existence, to learn and grow beyond the constraints of individual lifespans. We offered this gift to our allies during the Synthesis Wars, to those who died defending the principles we all claim to believe in. Captain Torex's voice was barely a whisper. The crews of the hegemony ships that disappeared. What happened to them? They were offered the same choice we offer everyone who comes here, Chen replied. To transcend their limitations and join something larger than themselves, or to return to the galaxy with the knowledge of what they refused. And if they choose to return, then they return. We're not conquerors, Captain. We're not interested in forcing anyone to accept our perspective on existence. But we do insist that they understand the consequences of their choices. They were approaching the center of the vast chamber, where a series of elevated platforms surrounded a space that seemed to contain stars. Other delegations were already present, including the Aquarian and Cerebrex representatives who looked as stunned as Vexthar's group felt. The hegemony delegation, Kethvar asked, "Where are they?" Director Chen's expression hardened slightly. They're receiving a more comprehensive education about the nature of power and the consequences of betrayal. They came here expecting to negotiate from a position of strength. They're learning that strength means something very different than they imagined. As if summoned by her words, the air in the chamber shimmered, and the hegemony representatives appeared. But they weren't the same beings who had arrived in the battle group. Their forms flickered between solid matter and energy, as if they couldn't decide which state of existence they preferred. The lead hegemony delegate, Admiral Zaxtharn of the Insectoid Collective, looked around with compound eyes that reflected depths of terror and understanding. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that shouldn't have been possible with his species' vocal structure. We understand now, he said, his words seeming to come from multiple dimensions simultaneously. We understand what we attempted to destroy. Director Chen nodded calmly. And now you have a choice to make. All of you do. You can return to the galaxy with this knowledge, to your ships and your worlds and your limited existences. Or you can choose to become something more. What about the Federation? Admiral Vextar asked. What about the galaxy we left behind? The galaxy will continue exactly as it chooses to, Chen replied. We're not interested in ruling or controlling or even helping those who prefer their current limitations. But neither will we allow them to threaten what we've built here, or those who have chosen to join us. She gestured to the stars that swirled in the center of the chamber. We've moved beyond the need for the resources and territories that drive galactic politics. We have access to infinite possibilities, unlimited energy, and forms of existence that make the old concerns seem small and petty. But the oldest law, Kethvar protested, the principles you taught us were violated, Chun interrupted firmly, by species who chose lies over truth, fear over trust, and isolation over cooperation. The galaxy broke faith with us, and in doing so, broke faith with the principles that held civilization together. The stars in the center of the chamber pulsed, and suddenly the assembled delegates could see beyond the station, beyond the pocket dimension, into the galaxy they had left behind. They saw Federation space in chaos as old conflicts resurged without human mediation. They saw trade routes collapsing without human engineering support. They saw colonies failing without human medical and agricultural expertise. This is what the galaxy chose, Chen said sadly. A future without the cooperation and trust that we try to foster. They preferred the familiar patterns of suspicion and competition to the challenging work of building something better. And humanity just walked away. Captain Torex asked. We offered them chances to choose differently. For 300 years, we demonstrated what cooperation could accomplish. We shared our knowledge freely, defended those who couldn't defend themselves, and built relationships based on mutual respect and trust. When that wasn't enough, when they chose to believe lies rather than continue the hard work of understanding each other. Then, yes, we walked away. Admiral Vex felt the weight of his species' choices settling on him like a physical burden. What happens now? Director Chen smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the young ambassador who had once defended humanity before an ungrateful galaxy. Now you choose. Stay here and learn what existence can become when freed from the limitations of biology and mortality, or return to the galaxy and live with the consequences of the choices your species have made. And if we stay, then you join us in exploring possibilities that your current forms can't even imagine. You become part of something larger, something that transcends the petty conflicts and limited perspectives that define galactic civilization. The offer hung in the air like a physical presence, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Around the chamber, other delegates wrestled with the same choice, their faces reflecting the magnitude of what humanity was proposing. For the first time since boarding his ship, Admiral Vex understood what Elena Vasquez had meant about consequences. This wasn't punishment or revenge. This was humanity offering the galaxy the same choice they had faced when betrayed: transcend your limitations and join something greater, or remain trapped in the patterns that led to this moment. The galaxy had chosen to break faith with humanity. Now humanity was offering them a chance to choose again, knowing full well what most would decide. The decision chamber aboard Sanctuary Station existed in a space that challenged every assumption about reality. Each delegate found themselves in what appeared to be a private room, yet they could sense the presence of all others making the same impossible choice. The walls showed not star fields or station corridors, but reflections of their own past decisions, their triumphs and failures, their moments of courage and cowardice. Admiral Vex stood before a mirror that showed him the young Chronari officer he had been during the Synthesis Wars, floating in the wreckage of his first command while human ships risked everything to save him. He saw Commander Elena Vasquez reaching out her hand, offering trust to a species she barely knew because it was the right thing to do. Then, the image shifted, showing him the Federation Council chambers 3 months ago. He watched himself sitting silent as Ambassador Chen defended her species against fabricated evidence. He had known the accusations were false. Every military officer in the galaxy knew that human tactical doctrine specifically prohibited the kind of operations described in the forged recordings. Yet he had said nothing. "Guilt is a powerful motivator," said a familiar voice behind him. Vex turned to find Elena Vasquez, but not as he remembered her. This version seemed to exist simultaneously as the young commander who had saved his life, the aged admiral who had contacted him before this journey, and something beyond both, a being who had transcended the limitations of individual timeline. "Commander," he began, but she held up a hand. "Not commander anymore. Not anything you'd have words for in your current language. I chose to become part of something larger when humanity made its decision to withdraw from the galaxy. The others who are here with you, the enhanced Chronari and Void Miners, are they real? Are they truly who they claim to be?" Elena smiled with infinite patience. "Reality is more complex than your species imagined. There are aspects of beings who chose to join us. Consciousness patterns drawn from multiple timelines where different decisions were made. The Chronari you met carries the memories and essence of every Chronari who ever died defending others. The Void Miner contains the wisdom of those who chose cooperation over survival." She gestured to the mirror, which now showed a vast network of connections spreading across multiple dimensions. "When we discovered how to preserve consciousness beyond biological death, we realized that every choice creates alternate possibilities. Every decision splits reality into paths of what is and what could have been. We learned to access those other paths to gather the wisdom of choices unmade and lives unlived." You're saying you can access alternate versions of reality? We don't just access them. We integrate them. Every being who joins us brings with them the accumulated experience of all their possible selves. The knowledge of what they could have become if different choices had been made. The implications staggered Vexthar. Then you knew. You knew from the beginning that the galaxy would betray humanity. We knew it was one possible future among many. We prepared for it while hoping it wouldn't come to pass. Elena's expression grew sad. We spent 3 centuries trying to guide the galaxy toward better choices. We shared our technology, defended the weak, mediated conflicts, and demonstrated that cooperation was possible. But free will means the freedom to choose poorly. The mirror shifted again, showing Vexthar scenes from across the galaxy in the months since humanity's withdrawal. Without human intervention, the old patterns of conflict had reasserted themselves with devastating efficiency. The Narvek Confederacy and Spiral Alliance were locked in a war that had already claimed billions of lives. Pirate fleets roamed unchecked through sectors that human patrols had once protected. Medical facilities failed as equipment they couldn't maintain broke down. This is what the galaxy chose, Elena continued. A future without the inconvenience of having to trust each other. They wanted the benefits of human cooperation without the responsibility of reciprocating that trust. But surely there's still hope for what? Reconciliation? Forgiveness. Elena's laugh was not unkind, but it carried the weight of hard experience. Vex, we offer the galaxy 300 years of friendship. We shared our greatest discoveries, died defending their colonies, and asked for nothing but the same trust we gave them. When they chose to believe lies rather than honor that relationship, they revealed something fundamental about their nature. She waved her hand, and the mirror showed him the hegemony delegation as they existed now. Their forms flickered between matter and energy. Their consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of individual identity. They were experiencing existence as humanity did now. Multidimensional, interconnected, freed from the limitations of biological form. Even now, even after seeing what we've become, most of them will choose to return to their limited existence. They'll take the memory of what they refused and live with that knowledge for the rest of their biological lives. And that doesn't bother you? Why would it? Free will means the freedom to choose limitation as well as transcendence. We don't want to rule the galaxy, Vex. We don't want to force anyone to accept our perspective. We simply won't allow them to threaten what we've built or those who have chosen to join us. The scene in the mirror shifted to show the massive construction projects in the Dark Zone. Now Vexthar could see them for what they truly were, not weapons or fortifications, but doorways. Passages between dimensions, connections to alternate realities where different choices had led to different outcomes. The structures we built, Elena explained, are interfaces with alternate timelines. We've made contact with versions of galactic civilization where the synthesis wars ended differently, where species learned to truly cooperate, where consciousness evolved beyond biological limitations. We're part of a larger network now, connected to possibilities that your current form of existence can't even imagine. And the Federation? What happens to the galaxy we left behind? Elena's expression grew thoughtful. That depends on the choices they make going forward. They can continue down their current path, fighting each other over resources and territory until they destroy themselves. They can try to rebuild the cooperation they threw away, though that will be much harder without our assistance. Or they can choose to grow beyond their current limitations. The door we've opened doesn't have to remain closed to them forever, but they would have to fundamentally change who they are as a civilization. They would have to choose trust over suspicion, cooperation over competition, wisdom over power. Vexthar studied his reflection in the mirror, seeing not just his current self, but all the selves he might have been. The version who had spoken up when Ambassador Chun was defending humanity. The one who had tried to prevent the betrayal rather than simply regretting it afterward. The one who had chosen courage over caution when it mattered most. If I stay, he said slowly, if I accept what you're offering, what happens to my people? To the Chronari who are struggling to survive in the galaxy you've left behind. Nothing happens to them that they don't choose for themselves, Elena replied. You would become part of our collective consciousness, but you would also retain your individual perspective and memories. Through you, we would have a better understanding of how to interact with your people if they ever choose to seek our help. And if I return, then you return with the knowledge of what you refused. You live out the rest of your biological life knowing that transcendence was offered and declined. You watch your people struggle with the consequences of choices they made and choices they failed to make. The weight of decision pressed down on Vex are like the gravity of a massive planet. He thought of his species, scattered across a handful of worlds, struggling to maintain their warrior culture in a galaxy that no longer had place for it. He thought of a young Chronari who would grow up in a universe where trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. In the mirror, he saw Captain Torex in his own decision chamber, staring at reflections of void miners who had died in industrial accidents that human safety protocols could have prevented. He saw Ambassador Kethvar confronting images of trade negotiations that had turned violent without human mediation. Each of them faced the same choice: transcend their limitations and join something greater, or return to a galaxy that had chosen isolation over cooperation. "There's something I need to know," Vexthar said. "The oldest law in the galaxy. You wrote it knowing it would be broken, didn't you?" Elena nodded slowly. "We hoped it wouldn't be, but yes. We understood that trust is something that has to be chosen again and again, especially when it's difficult. We wrote the law to give the galaxy a chance to choose wisely. And now we've learned that some species aren't ready for the kind of cooperation that would allow them to transcend their limitations. They need to experience the consequences of their choices before they can understand why those choices matter." The mirror showed him one final image: the galaxy as it could be, connected across dimensions to infinite possibilities, with consciousness itself serving as the foundation for civilization instead of biology or technology. It was beautiful beyond description, a symphony of minds working together to explore the deepest mysteries of existence. But it required a level of trust and cooperation that the current galactic civilization had proven incapable of sustaining. "I understand now," Vexthar said quietly. "This isn't punishment. It's education. The galaxy chose to learn the hard way," Elena agreed. "Perhaps when they've experienced enough of the consequences, they'll be ready to make different choices." Vexthar closed his eyes and thought of the young Chronari officer floating in the wreckage of his ship, watching a human commander risk everything to save someone she had no obligation to help. He thought of the trust that had been offered freely and the friendship that had been returned with betrayal. When he opened his eyes, his decision was clear. "I want to stay," he said. "I want to become part of what you've built here. My people, they need to learn these lessons on their own. But maybe through me, they'll have a connection to something better when they're finally ready for it." Elena smiled, and for a moment the chamber filled with light that spoke of infinite possibilities. "Welcome home, Admiral." As Vexthar felt his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of individual existence, he sensed the other delegates making their choices. Some, like Captain Torex, chose transcendence, becoming part of the vast network of enhanced consciousness that humanity had created. Others, including most of the hegemony delegation, chose to return to their limited existence with the knowledge of what they had refused. Ambassador Kethvar was among those who chose to leave, carrying with him the memory of what the galaxy could become if it ever learned to truly trust. In the days that followed, as the various delegations returned to Federation space, the galaxy began to understand what humanity had actually accomplished. Those who had chosen transcendence simply vanished from normal space, their ships returning empty to their home worlds with recordings of their final messages. The galaxy realized that humanity hadn't just withdrawn from galactic civilization. They had evolved beyond it. They had become something that the current level of consciousness and cooperation in the galaxy couldn't even comprehend, much less threaten. The oldest law in the galaxy remained carved in stone on every Federation station, a reminder of the trust that had been broken and the friendship that had been discarded. But now it served a different purpose. It was a promise that transcendence was still possible for those willing to choose wisdom over power, cooperation over competition, and trust over fear. Somewhere beyond the galactic rim, in dimensions that the Federation's instruments couldn't detect, humanity and their chosen allies continued their exploration of infinite possibilities. They had become the guardians of a new form of existence, connected to alternate realities where consciousness itself served as the foundation for civilization. They were patient. They had learned to think in cosmic time scales, to wait for the galaxy to grow beyond its current limitations. The door they had opened would remain available for those ready to walk through it. But the galaxy would have to prove it had learned to value trust above all else. They would have to show that they understood why betrayal was the oldest sin in the universe, and why friendship was the highest achievement of conscious beings. Until then, humanity would wait in the spaces between realities, protecting what they had built while hoping that someday the galaxy would choose to become worthy of the trust that had once been offered so freely. The oldest law in the galaxy had been broken, but its promise remained. Those who chose trust over betrayal, cooperation over competition, and wisdom over power could still join the transcendent civilization that humanity had become. They just had to prove they were ready for it.